Today's topic is rounding decimals from Unit 9. In this lesson, you'll round decimals to approximate value by finding the mentioned place value and analyzing the best way to round. When you can round numbers to the place value successfully is when you know you have it. Some vocabulary: decimal, a number that represents a whole in a fraction with a decimal point in the middle. Everything on the left of the decimal point would be our whole number, and everything on the right represents our fraction. Place value, the value of a digit within the number. Rounding, the act of approximating a number to make it easier to work with, especially when doing mental math. So, a rhyme that I like to remember when rounding decimals: find your place and look next door. 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, let it soar. This is going to be great to put down in your notes if you want to print this out, or if you want to write it down in your math notebook. Following these steps every single time is going to ensure that you round correctly. When we round, we'll find our place value. If I want to round to the nearest hundredths, I find my place value and I look next door. 7 is in my hundredths place, so I'm going to look at the 9 next door. If it's 5 or more, let it soar. 4 or less, let it rest. Because 9 is greater than 5, I'm going to add 1 to my hundredths place, turning it into an 8. Everything behind my place value that I've just rounded becomes 0. Everything before my place value stays the same. So, a great example would look like this. So we have 56.386, and the first place value I want to round is the nearest whole number. So remember, anything on the left of my decimal is our whole number. The first place value there is our ones place. So I find my place value, which is my ones place. There's a 6 in my ones place. I'm going to look next door. 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, let it soar. Because 3 falls in that 4 or less category, my 6 is going to stay the same. So remember, anything before the place value that I'm rounding stays the same. I decide what my place value does, that 6 is going to stay, and then everything behind it becomes a 0. Because I don't necessarily need anything after that decimal point, I don't have to write those zeros down. So 56.386 rounded to the nearest whole number is going to be 56. Now, let's take a look at our next one. It wants us to round to the nearest tenth. I'm going to find my tenths place, and I'm going to look next door. 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, let it soar. So I found my 3 in my tenths place. I have an 8 next door. Since that 8 is more than 5, my 3 is going to soar, which means I add 1 to my 3. 3 becomes 4. Everything before my place value stays the same. And then everything after becomes a 0. Now again, because these are decimals, I don't necessarily need to write those zeros, so my answer would be 56.4. Finally, let's look at our last one. It wants us to round to the nearest hundredth. I'm going to find my hundredths place, and I'm going to look next door. I have an 8 in my hundredths place and a 6 in my thousandths place. 4 or more, or 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, let it soar. 6 is greater than 5, so I know my 8 is going to soar. That means I add 1 to it. 8 plus 1 becomes 9. Everything before stays the same. And then everything after becomes a 0 and disappears. So 56.386 rounded to the nearest hundredth is 56.39. So there are multiple ways that we round a number just depending on what place value we want to round it to. It's going to be important to know our place values. When a question asks a specific place value, we know how to find that and where to look to know how to round. Hope that helps. We'll be working on this skill this week in class, and I look forward to seeing you there.